live. Stuff's about to get real. Sam is going to be joining us, and we have a special guest with us today. Sam Tucker, once again, has jumped in your spot there. I think he is planning for you to hold him.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. Dave Fries. I'm here with my two regular co-hosts of In Top Form.
Somnath Sikdar.
Alex Fries.
And today we have a special guest. You'll be learning a lot more about Dr. David Weiman as we go. We all felt it was important to have a mental health professional here today, in part because of the title, Anger, Fear, Anxiety, and Frustration, the True Drivers of Success. What no happiness? Just be patient. All right. Dr. David Weiman is a psychologist and a management consultant. You've worked with a number of businesses, we know. You've helped businesses through difficult and hard times and helped people sort of happily take things to the next level too. As we go, feel free to jump in, offer diagnoses. We've signed all the HIPAA waivers. We're not worried. Also, when we go off the rails scientifically, because we're going to share with you some science, we're going to share our personal experiences. Sometimes in the Venn diagram where those things meet, we have either an accurate or inaccurate understanding. So you jump in on the science at any time. You will not put us off of our train of thought. Just to get everybody started, I want to give you a quote from 350 BC on this issue. This is Aristotle. The angry man is aiming at what he can attain, and the belief that you will attain your aim is pleasant. And we're going to share with you a lot of science that says anger, far from being the negative emotion that a lot of people think it is, and that it interferes with achievement and success. Because a lot of people think, oh, success is all about basking and bathing and wallowing in happiness and cheerfulness. And it isn't.
It's disgusting. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that.
That was the outside voice. That came out.
Yeah.
So
I couldn't keep it in.
now the part two of the show, which will be not next week because we're at Traffic and Conversion, so we're going to come to you with a series of mini shows on the very interesting stuff we find there about improving your business. But in 2 weeks, we're going to have the flip side of this, which is happiness, the true driver of success. And of course, like anything else that we talk about here, it's hard, it's not easy, it takes a little bit of thought. You can make it a lot easier by understanding some strategies and some principles. But like anything else, if we go to anger and it leads to rage and lack of control, you're not going to get stuff done because people will hate you and not do things. But look at Apple, look at Jeff Bezos. There's some angry guys, and yet people followed them. So the anger was being applied, maybe not in the most comfortable way for everybody there, but in a way that still built a team and got amazing things done. So if you're too far at one end or the other, if you're super happy, think about a time when you've been incredibly happy. For most people, or for many of us, that's a time when we're on vacation, or we're in a different setting and we're just all blissed out and we're eating super healthy food and doing yoga every morning, and we're maybe the only guy in the yoga class. So for all kinds of reasons, we're happy. We have all the endorphins of happiness. You don't want to go home.
Right.
You don't want to leave the yoga class. A lot of times they have to poke you and wake you up. Maybe this isn't for you, Sam, because you probably stay awake, but they poke me and make me wake up. I'm in a super state of happiness and homeostasis. I want to stay right where I am. So in these two shows, we're going to explore, in this case, we're going to be talking about anger, fear, anxiety, and frustration. We're going to be focusing on the emotion of anger because it's got such a bad name. But Dave, we also want you to help us make distinctions between fear, anxiety, frustration, and anger. And also, let's talk about how we can use those positively. So that's what's going on today. One of our regular viewers, and by the way, you let us know. Oh, Greg Buckley.
Greg Buckley.
Buckley! We were on Greg's show this morning, not as guests or anything, just wildly telling him how much we loved and liked what he was up to.
He's been showing us some love back. Not right now. Well,
Super loyal, by the way.
Some coming in.
I notice he tends more to the liking. I think he's afraid that if it's the love, oh, there's the love. I think he maybe was afraid that it was being misinterpreted. Because he does go away with us for a week into the desert for some sweat lodging, drum beating, shooting.
Greg
So-
says it's appropriate that we have a mental health professional.
That does not surprise me. Thank you for being here, Greg. So let's jump into this and get started. Dave, we sort of sprung this on you. We told you in advance what the title was going to be, but now you've heard our and actually agreed, at least in fun, that happiness can be just despicable.
Indeed.
So react to the concept and lay the groundwork for anything that people need to know when they're listening to us.
I think that these are trigger words for a lot of people, particularly anger. Seen as something like in families, for example, that's to be avoided. And there's often somebody who was the angry parent or the angry sibling.
We specialize, by the way, in trigger words and trigger.
And by the way, I'm just talking about last Thanksgiving. But that causes people to kind of not want to talk about it and not explore it. And I think what you're going to talk about today, we're going to discuss, is really digging beneath what the reaction to those words is, and how do you channel that? How do you understand it in a different way? For me, as a psychologist, I remember in a graduate school class, the professor said, anger's never a primary emotion. And I'd never thought about it that way, because I always thought, well, people are angry, and that's the state.
That's the
they're
thing.
in.
Yeah.
And he said, it's real. There's something else that happened or that's causing that. And maybe it's a loss of something or it's a reaction to something, but it made me rethink what I understood my whole life up to that point. Like I thought I understood what anger was because I knew it when I saw it. But then I started to realize it's not so much what you see that's the anger, that's the sort of the manifestation of it or the behavior of it. And then my doctoral interests were in anxiety. And I read this definition of it, that anxiety was it was worry, and that it was anxious apprehension about future events. And so anger's sort of in the moment, fear is maybe a little more distant, and then anxiety's even further away, I think, in terms of where is that thing that you're anxious about. The fear is a little closer, maybe the anger is, it's
The
right here.
science, as no surprise here, bears out what you're saying. Much to my surprise, when we were researching today's show, which I know many viewers will not feel is something that we do, or they'll be surprised by the notion that this is the product of research. But as we were researching the show, I came across something that was astonishing to me, which is that when you go from that anxiety, the stress-producing anxiety, to anger, anger actually triggers a willingness to confront or move toward the thing and resolution,
Right.
and cortisol levels drop so that you're more capable of seeing what's going on and making decisions about allocation of resources. Here's a couple of things. I'm going to leap to something that was later in the show. This is kind of in the summary of the science, but basically the science is assuming that anger offers a sense of control. We're going to talk about when that tips out of control. Anger creates optimism. Anger boosts focus on the practical and what can be done. And anger abets creativity and ambition, as well as aiding the understanding of others. So we have science on each of these things. They all sound counterintuitive. But as I started thinking about it and looking at some of the examples we had today, they all seem to be true. So let me, Alex, start with you. We'll come this way over to Sam. Hey, can you think of a time in your life when you used anger positively and or when it tipped over into something that wasn't serving you anymore?
Just one.
Well, this is true, by the way, that really successful people are really adept at going to anger, but they're really adept at one other thing. If they let anger go too far.
I would say most recently would be editing a piece of audio for a program that we were doing for one of the people for CR Publishing.
Mm-hmm.
That was just invoking a lot of anger.
You actually said at dinner, thank God I did not pursue my childhood hobby of audio and video editing.
Yeah, because it was so anger inducing. But that sort of, then I just used that to power through and edit audio.
Now, at no time did you throw anything or get into road rage?
No, and that's usually pretty controllable for me, I think, as all of you will attest to. I've never really had large bouts of anger unless I'm fighting with Jamie, my sister, which doesn't happen anymore even now. So that was really only when I was a child and didn't quite have the ability to control every emotion because I was a child.
Well, notice that, by the way, that as adults we practice both feeling the anger, noticing it's coming on, and getting better control over it.
And utilizing it.
Yeah, but that's
you
the
don't
thing.
know how to properly utilize it until you've matured in mentally and emotionally.
Let's contrast this, where you felt the anger, kept it under control, used it to get this thing done, which interestingly the science says anger is very useful in allocating resources, figuring out how to solve problems, and weirdly bonding with other people and establishing your self-worth. One of the examples we'll turn to Dave on in a minute is if a friend came up to you and had ketchup on the corner of his mouth, took your sleeve and wiped it off, that would probably trigger anger. Now, if it goes to rage and you punch him and get arrested, obviously bad result. But if you're angry and you confront him and you tell him why that's disrespectful and what's going to go bad about that, that has established your worth and makes him make a decision about how he's going to behave socially. So I found that fascinating. So you use this. Let's contrast this to you and I appeared on a video cast of some kind or another the other day to promote an event where we're speaking, and then Alex later spotted a comment where a guy, and we do not have the explicit rating here, so we won't repeat what he said, but he was just ranting to no one in particular that he didn't understand why this was on his page, his feed. He didn't want it there, and somebody should get it the F off of there. That's not particularly useful.
By the way, Katie Harper is on and says hello to you.
Oh, Katie, we went another week without booking her date in Spring Fashion. Our Spring Fashion Fest is coming. She
has exquisite radar for just people talking about yoga. And I think that's what, I mean, aside from the fact that she liked this half an hour before we started, right? She's got that radar going. It's beautiful.
It's Yogadar.
Yes. Thank you. That was
carefully enhanced. So I like this as an example because it looked daunting and it actually made you angry. How, on a scale of 0 to 10, where 10 you're going to probably do something to get in trouble, and 0 you're all blissed out. In fact, you're too relaxed, you might like wet your own pants. Where are you on the anger scale there when you say, okay, I'm just going to go do this and get it done?
I would say probably right in the middle. I mean, but buffering on the rage at some points. And I get that way with a lot of things because, if I want to make an edit to either we're building out our website right now for In Top Form and I'm not experienced, to the fullest extent in web development. So there's a learning curve there, or if there's any kind of learning curve and you're bumping into, I think, barriers, and you probably see this with training kids, and you've obviously seen this, I assume, and I noticed this in Scouts where somebody was struggling with something, and it gets, they keep hitting that barrier, and then they start getting frustrated, it moves from frustration then to anger, and then occasionally it tips over into the rage, and they go berserk, and have other issues there. But I would say for me, for the editing, that was actually last night. That was probably right in the middle, like a 6 maybe, or buffering onto like 5 or buffering onto a 6.
So then you interrupt that somehow. Is that internal dialogue? Do you say like, wait, I'm going to go into rage, I better get this done, or what happens there?
Well, there's kind of a external motivation to get something done. And it's not, the editing of the audio is not necessarily directly for me, it's for somebody else. That's also going to benefit me because I'm going to get paid for it. So there's a very external and superficial motivation there that says, hey, I need to at least deliver on this, and going into full rage mode is not going to help me deliver on that. It's going to inhibit that because it's going to take longer and longer and longer to get through that barrier. So that's just where my brain sort of just switches over and says, all right, I need to power through this. And same thing with web development or something that I don't know about. I start bumping up against the rage point where then I sort of take a step back and say, okay, where do I need to go from here? And it's usually research to figure out what is the next step or what is the solution to the problem, because with stuff like editing and stuff like web development, there usually is a solution, a direct solution to that problem that usually you can find on YouTube or some other forum or something. So it's super fast to go and say, let me go find the solution to it before I go. And that's the anger then is the motivation to find the solution.
Yeah, I mean, I often tell clients it's easier to blow out a match than to put out a house fire when we're talking about anger. Mm-hmm. And there's two things Alex said that I think are terrific. One is recognizing the frustration, but then that's the signal to do something, to take an action that's not only productive, but it's more efficient and effective. But he said something about Jamie and recognizing now as an adult what it was like when he couldn't do that. And that maturation is really important because he's able to look back now at something that he used to do and say, well, I've changed. It's the same thing in the body, it's the same thing in the mind. But he's even able to look back, which I think is tremendous, and say, I now see what it was then and how I deal with it differently now, which I think is excellent.
Katie says she is in a constant state of rage. # is that bad.
So, yes.
#yes.
Yes. Well, here's the Katie. So we're going to take that seriously and actually address it. But a couple of things about what Alex said and what you said and did, and people watching this live may want to go back and watch this video in a second because you're going to be able to see something that both Dave and Alex did that's really interesting. And this is like super secret level stuff that'll be interesting to you, I think. So as you say, Alex realized that he didn't have this power before. His explanation for it, I think, is that he was able to disassociate. So he gets to anger, which we know from the science, people who get to anger fast actually are the ones that thrive and survive, and so we have offspring that get to anger pretty fast. But what's really makes anger powerful is that he would say, I would see this, I'd recognize it, he'd reach a point where he was aware of it. It's the match, not the burning house. And then he would go, I'd take a step back, which to me is a healthy disassociation. You can see everything that's going on. And Dave, by the way, you explained he felt the frustration, and you made this gesture right here, which is where most of us feel it. And then you said, when he said he took a step backwards, what am I going to do next? And you're gesturing in a way that shows how you process that and how you process it too. And it's also consistent with the science, which says anger is the best way to be forward-looking and moving towards something and resolution. And because oxytocin drops out when you interrupt that, rather where you're not going to rage, where like when you have anxiety and stress, it's there, it's building up. When it drops, you're actually able to, the field of view expands. Mm-hmm. You're able to more accurately assess what's going on, come up with a plan for it.
And I think you're harnessing, because the neurochemicals change when you're angry, that you're now harnessing that in a different way.
Exactly. Oh, did you have something to add to that? I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Sam, now you're in the business. Everybody that really knows you would say you were one of the calmest people they know. Mm-hmm. But I've known you for a really long time, and I see you turn on what Alex is describing. So could you describe how you do it when you spar, when you fight, when you teach, any of those settings?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for me, I typically, don't get frustrated or, reach this anger point in like task situations. It's just how I am. If I run into a frustrating task, I'm much quicker to either just process through it, like the technicalities of what's frustrating, or just task switch and come back to it later. That's just how I operate, and it's always worked fairly well for me.
But still, you're describing a lower level of anger, which is frustration. Mm-hmm. It's just your trigger. You're triggering that a little sooner on that scale where 0, where you wet yourself, 10, you're going to get arrested.
Right.
you're triggering that at 2 or 3,
Right.
or he's triggering it at 5 or 6.
Yeah, I think frustration probably takes different forms for some people. Like the frustration for me is probably a way longer experience, whereas for frustration for some people might be very short and moving directly into more of an anger, moving very quickly into like a rage state. So
Right.
I could go for, and it depends probably what I'm doing, but with the audio editing, for instance, there was a lot of frustration there just because it's so tedious.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not frustrating enough where it's causing immediate anger. Where there are some other things where it's super frustrating early on, and then you move faster into anger, and that's where your triggering, I think, probably happens at different points. So like you said, depending on what you're doing.
Yeah, and I think one is like the nature of the task at hand is going to change the slope of that curve, and environmentally, what do you have going on? We were talking about someone earlier that they were always at a high level of agitation. So if you're filled to the brim, you're going to boil over all the time. And I think part of people say like, oh, you're so calm all the time, is it's not that I'm calm all the time, is I'm regularly and willfully
Bringing it down.
keeping the margin at the high, from the high level of the cup, and I find that constantly moving and exercising and working out is needed for me, right? Is that constant movement is the burn. It like burns it off. So I find I get frustrated a lot with my team or with students in the interpersonal reactions. And again, when I was younger, the immediate response was, all right, I'm going to deal with this right away. And then over time, you see that's not really effective. So I've found that, okay, I have frustration with this person or with my team. I'm going to divert, use that energy to get stuff done, and that burns it off. You can, it comes down to the same thing, right? Taking the step back, seeing the situation, and then saying, okay, why is this person, failing me so badly, let's say, and what can I do to, put things in place to help them and help myself in turn.
You're talking about something that's clear in the science again too, which is depending on what happens in your life and where you reach rage state, exercise makes it easier and faster. Like anger, frustration, anxiety even triggers exercise. You're getting all the benefits of the anger and the neurotransmitter mix and this ability to move toward it without some of the stuff that interferes for people, because you're way less likely to go from anger into the rage state, to tip over where it's not.
And that's it's that tipping point, and only getting to that tipping point and accepting the nature. So if we're always trying to avoid anger and suppress it, we're never going to learn how to process it, right? So it's like we fight in very controlled ways, right? During sparring or even drilling, and there are days when you're training and it just seems like you can't turn it on, right? But then something happens. That guy that you should be beating easily almost gets a choke on you. Or the guy that beats you all the time, you just reach that point like, well, not today. And they'll probably still beat you.
But that's a little anger motivated.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. You may still lose, but kind of getting to that threshold gives you clarity. It gives you a little bit more energy, and you can fight through. And then that process of fighting through and pushing yourself farther in a challenging way, enables you to grow. And, we've talked about that idea before of the comfort zone, is we always want to go back to that comfort zone. Only will we leave and you said this to me, is if the pain of staying is greater than the pain of leaving. And anger,
we got to expand it to be able to deal with other stuff.
Exactly, and anger is a good indicator. Like, okay, now it's time to go.
Mm-hmm. I just want you to react to one thing that's right on this. When Alex and I were up at Ferris in New York, Josh Waitskin was there, and Josh is a chess master, but also a martial artist. I think he's a jiu-jitsu.
He's a kung fu and jiu-jitsu.
And kung fu.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
So
very good at jiu-jitsu.
He was saying is he gets the most out of sparring with the cheaters or fighting the cheaters. And he found like he wanted to fight as many cheaters as he could, the guys that push the rules or play dirty.
Yeah.
Because if he could harness the anger and get used to that, like, hey,
Yeah.
people are just going to cheat, that made him way better against
Right.
people that didn't cheat.
Right.
So I find that interesting.
Yeah, no,
sort of-
I found that to be true as well. And you know, jiu-jitsu is one of those sports where people that are, you know, maybe they're very competitive or they're novices to the game, they'll try to use like dirty tricks that, you know, somebody has told them or they've assumed will work, like certain kinds of pressure points or like gouging type of moves. And while they hurt and they're uncomfortable, they're not effective in a jiu-jitsu type of mode, right? They're not going to actually inhibit and prevent the person from submitting you. It'll just make them mad in the process.
It might make them, therefore, submit you faster.
Exactly.
Yeah. So one of the things that's interesting about what you said here is that I've got a quote from James Averill, I believe, a professor of psychology at University of Massachusetts, and he says people resort to mild to moderate rage and anger as often as several times a day and at least several times a week at the very least. And so it's universal, it's frequent, and what you're talking about here is becoming a master of or mastering and exercising so you don't tip over in all of those.
Right.
So you get all the benefits without the negatives.
What I also picked up from what you said is that you don't want to waste this.
Right.
That if this is constantly flowing out of you, then it's not being channeled correctly, and you're wasting that. The other piece that I took away from that is that, and something similar about what you said to what Alex talked about, they're both things that you two are professionals at. And I'm wondering how much the anger is different when it affects your integrity versus something else. Because I think that integrity piece, what I do, and it might not be something other people can see. I don't know if they observed Alex, if they would have seen that reaction, or if they observed you, if they would have seen it. Because a lot of people tell you that they perceive you as very calm. But you also seem to know when is it about integrity and when is it just frustration because I couldn't do that task at that moment.
Right.
So let's contrast that with the ketchup example. I mean, that would make any of us mad if somebody came up and wiped ketchup on our sleeve. Because it's an invasion of personal space and all of these other things. It's
nasty.
It is. Or, well, no, I'm not even going to go there.
Hang on.
We have to stop. Something's happening.
Is it Katie?
Katie's been Michelle
Well, Katie's
Summers
been very
is on,
patient for her answer. Oh, Michelle,
and
Dr.
she
Michelle, welcome.
says, "Why do I live so far away?" Probably because you're here, and she's jealous. Katie says, "I think anger is short-lived because it's so exhausting, hard to maintain that level of energy." And then she says, "What if you gesture with your middle finger?"
Well, that is one of those techniques I think that we're talking about here. It probably makes you feel a little bit better. Well, go ahead, Doc.
But since it involves somebody else and thinking about two people involved in this, that will create an anger reaction in somebody else you may not want. And they may decide to submit you earlier.
Right, right.
So what is road rage about? Well, it's not just one person internally thinking about something. It's doing a Katie, perhaps, giving them the middle finger.
What you're saying, I think, is Katie should do that when their back's turned.
Or not at all.
Because she'll feel better. Or
Just scratch a little bit. Or
I think you touched on it too, is that idea of integrity. So we kind of we laugh off these flippant triggers of anger, right? But you know, there are times when you have to stand your ground and you have to put your foot down, and that use of anger is needed in an outward way. So it's like, look, I have to hold this hill on this. And when you're always flipping your lid, and then you say, well, this is the hill I have to die on, people don't believe you. But if most of the time, if you're processing it well and you get to that point, look, we have to stand for something right now, and you're going to show that anger, you can use that gravitas to very effectively,
I love it.
Get your point across.
And you don't want to, I think, based on what you're saying, I don't think you want to cause the other person in what you're doing to get in an uncontrollable rage themselves. And
Right.
the thing that I'm thinking of
That's escalation.
right.
Yeah.
I mean, in my own sad martial arts training, somebody asked the instructor, well, if somebody is about to attack you, why not just kick them in the groin? And he said, because that may cause them to be that may cause them to flip out on you, and that's not good for you. And I think that's part of what you're saying is, like, not just deciding what hill to die on, but not making everybody else so crazed in the moment that they're
Right.
going to come up the hill after you.
Yeah, so Katie, here's an interesting, the sort of sequence I'm going to describe to you permeates everything from negotiation to interrogation to team building to winning the hearts and minds in a war. So if somebody has a deeply held belief and you just go straight, and it makes you angry, I mean, we see this a lot in our society now, and you go straight in and just challenge it, they're going to shut down, and their anger is going to come up, and they're not going to listen to anything you say. You're not going to be persuasive. But if instead there's this period of listen, 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 empathy, 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 rapport, 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 and it builds. Now, this doesn't mean you agree with everything you state that they're saying, but you can say, I understand why you're saying that, and let me clarify, is this what you're saying?
And that's critical because there are studies that show that as anger goes up, the ability to hear effectively goes down.
Exactly.
And I wonder as well, if somebody's angry all the time or feels like they're, and I'm taking Katie's comments seriously because I wonder if there aren't people who kind of filter the world to see threats. And if you filter out everything else but the things you see as threats, you might be reacting all the time.
And you're going to be triggering threat, because when you feel threatened, you're going to behave in certain ways that go right into the reptilian brain of the other person. And that person's going to say, here's a threat. Look how they're acting.
Right.
They're in danger mode. They're in fight or flight mode. So once we get done with the empathy, rapport building, I'm here to understand you piece, it's much easier than to say, hey, let me just restate what you said. And then to very discreetly ask questions about, like, is it possible that you could think of any situation or circumstance where that thing you just said might not be true and this other thing might work better? Even if they say no, they really do realize that that's probably the case, and you're making, some headway. But just going right in against anger, especially when you see the physical manifestations of it, is like kicking somebody in the groin. Unless you're in a hideously life-threatening situation where somebody has a gun, you don't just shoot them to avoid being shot.
Yeah, and Sam said something in a demonstration you did that I attended that I thought was great, which is about assessing threat. Mm-hmm. And part of that, correct me if I'm wrong, but part of what you said is, well, how close is the person to you? How big a threat are they?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But we have cognitive tools to deal with it. We have cognitive tools to create distance. If we're in a meeting room with somebody who's right next to us, how do we do what you just described and create the psychological distance if the physical proximity is right there? Because anything close to us is more of a threat than if it's further away.
So sometimes when we're close, both physically and warfare is going on cognitively, I will even say something like this. Let's just take a deep breath here for a second. And it breaks that cycle.
Right.
And chances are, even if they're not in rapport with me, if I reel back and take a deep breath, they're going to want to do that. And now we've changed the whole neurotransmitter mix in that person. So I think that's what you're talking about. There are little tricks and tools that you can use. Let me just throw this out here. This is Richard Davidson. This is quite a title, by the way. Director of the University of Wisconsin's influential laboratory for effective neuroscience. I'm going to go visit this guy. I came across this in the research. I want to know more of what he's up to. It says here he studied only Dave will understand what I'm about to read. The neural origins of emotions for 40 years and his pioneering investigations of the asymmetric brain response to anger. So far, I don't really know that this is useful to us, but it's about to get that way. That the emotion is intrinsically rewarding with a positive quality that mobilizes resources, increases vigilance, facilitates the removal of obstacles, and I would say increases vigilance and persistence, by the way, when channeled properly, facilitates the removal of obstacles in the way our goal in the way of our goal pursuits, particularly if the anger can be divorced from the propensity to harm or destroy. So that's what we are all talking about in our examples. No, we are not behind, so this is awesome. Dave, we've all sort of shared, I haven't yet, but I would love to hear, can you share an example? Because, I mean, we lay people always think like, oh, a psychologist, a psychotherapist. Well, I guess lay people either think they're working out their own issues, you hear that, or they're really super well equipped to deal with these things. So,
the least.
So, can you tell a story?
The cobbler's children.
About your own experience, because you've been taught these things, and there's a difference between just learning them and applying them.
This happened before I knew any of this, but it's interesting to look back on it. I was a young copywriter right out of college working for an ad agency, and I had submitted some ideas for a client meeting that the boss never told me whether he liked them or didn't like them. We show up at the client meeting, he offers an idea that I thought was idiotic, and before the client could react, he said it was my idea. And I felt like I was so angry about it. And I figured out a way to offer my actual idea to the client, which then made the boss angry. And I thought, well, good. Now you know how it feels. And after the meeting, the boss and his wife had a meeting with me. And I didn't have any power in this situation, but my integrity was at stake, or whatever you want to call it, because they lied about something about me. And I didn't know the client, but I thought, I think this idea is stupid, and now they're going to think I'm stupid because they think it's my idea.
Oh, we have a quote, by the way. I don't want to interrupt you, but there's a direct quote on this point from Jeff Bezos, who was responding to an idea somebody told him, where he said, quote, "I'm sorry, I didn't take my stupid pill today." So, carry on.
So, what I realized then was and it relates to integrity. I thought, if this guy's willing to lie about me, what am I doing here? And how do I exit the situation like you were talking about? And I started planning after that meeting to leave there. And what it made me do, though, is want to prove myself to my own clients. So I started my own little shop and had a little studio that I shared with my cousin over a movie theater, and they would start
I was a client of yours then, I think.
Yes, they would start popping the popcorn in the afternoon for the movie theater, which doesn't smell all that good when it's gone through a greasy vent up into your space, and I still have bad nightmares about it. But
do you shout "mommy" though when you're waking up, or is it popcorn?
Popcorn.
Okay.
Yeah. So
because the mommy thing would have been weirder.
But the fire that created the popcorn also is what fired me as well. And interestingly, after leaving there, I found out that he had taken money out of my paycheck to pay for health insurance, but hadn't actually contributed it to my health insurance.
That raises the margins.
Right, and so my brother, who you know well, sent him a letter explaining what would happen if he didn't return it to me. And I felt like the scales were balanced a little bit because of that. Like, he did something to me that really impacted my integrity. Then I found out he really wasn't someone you could trust, and so we flipped that around. But the anger from that drove me to do something for myself, put me in a much better position to take on a position that changed my career. And so, although I was upset in the moment, the ability to, and I think you were getting at this before, like, I was able to do something, not about that, like I couldn't change what happened, but it was like when you said you would switch tasks. I just got onto something that now benefited me with a kind of laser focus that I didn't have there.
Well, it changed the trajectory of your life.
Absolutely.
There.
Yeah.
What's interesting about that, it's a perfect example of something that's discussed here again in a lot of the research, is how anger readjusts the balance of society in a very healthy way. Again, to return to the ketchup one, if you let somebody keep doing that, it's going to just get worse and worse for you. If you hadn't recognized this and adjusted it, you would have felt shame and embarrassment and that you had been lied to and about. So you adjusted that whole thing, but you realized you had to go beyond just saying something that made that untrustworthy boss bad. By the way, I think up on In Top Form, I may have shared that 4-part article on trust. So if you haven't seen it yet, check on the In Top Form page, because there's a really good article on one of the things that Dave is getting at there, which is if trust is absent and if there's a breach of trust, it either has to be healed, and in that case it would have taken something miraculous, which didn't happen because they came in and just were mad that you had showed them up. But really building trust in a relationship so that it goes, because we're all going to make mistakes. Here's one of the things, is had that person behaved properly and shown you trust in 20 other circumstances, and they had said this either because they weren't thinking or they weren't careful, even if they were intentionally being a little deceptive, you would have said like, oh, this is a good person, they made a mistake this time. Instead, there had probably been lots of discrete indicators that they weren't worthy of your trust, and this was the straw that broke the camel's back.
Not only that, but when they were trying to describe to me why they did it, they said, we were trying to make you look good. What's your problem? Like, this was a phenomenal idea, and we were giving you credit for it. So it was even more attacking my character in a way. Like, I couldn't come up with a good idea,
Right.
so they had to fake one for me. But also, and to your point, if somebody in a leadership position like Jeff Bezos is only acting in an angry or condescending way, then that's not going to create trust or comfort or have the staff sacrifice for him.
Right.
So there's a lot of other things that he's doing so that he can do that, and there's enough trust there to create a container for anything else that happens. So I think that in leadership, it's like what I didn't have with that boss is exactly what you described. There wasn't any trust, there wasn't any container for what happened, and it broke apart.
Anything that we need to address there? There's a lot going on. Thank you, by the way, for all our guests. I'm not seeing as much loving as liking, so we're going to follow our own advice. One of the things that we tell everybody to do that's watching this is when you need people or want people to do something, give them a reason to help you, and then actually tell them what you need and want them to do, because otherwise they don't know. And the example that there, it's already being anticipated by somebody, but by Katie. Well, thank you, Katie, for the love. But we want you to love and like this when it's on, but we also, if any of this rang true for you, or you have a friend or a relative, or there's people you associate with, share it to them by messenger or share it. And also, something new, the podcast is up. So should we put a link up so they could go and subscribe?
Put a link. It's on iTunes, Google Play for the Android user, Stitcher.
Although we should say for the Android user, also maybe take a deep breath and think about whether you're doing the right thing or not.
Yeah, I mean that's a personal choice, so I'm not going to get too worked up about that. So I think the freedom is there for them to do that. But yeah, it's up. We have 7 episodes in total up. There are, I don't know, 4. Well, after today, 4 more that will be posted weekly. So
yeah, so they'll start going up weekly, and it's a great way to catch up. If you can't watch the whole thing, you got to go in and out, and you were like, I'm so excited by that part. We would also love for you, in addition to sharing these videos, which is important, subscribe to the podcast, give us a, hopefully, 5-star review. That's what we're really interested
5 stars.
in.
Yeah.
5 stars, people.
If for some reason we are not getting a 5-star, hold on, message us, tell us why before you like snap, and we'll see if we can fix it. And then also you could leave a review, and we would love you to tell people what you get out of this. Like, is it funny? Are you enjoying it? Are you taking things and applying them in your business and getting results, which we hope that everybody is. Because we're sharing with you some of the best stuff that we use to get results at the strategic and at the tactical level in all of our businesses. So a couple of other things I wanted to get here is that Jennifer Lerner, who's a psychologist at Harvard, another neuroscientist by the name of Herrero, looked at psychological and biological measures associated with anger of heart rate, testosterone levels, cortisone levels, brain activity, asymmetric left activation. We might need you to tell us what all this asymmetric activation business is. At times when people induced anger, and what they found again was that it makes you think more clearly. It makes you absolutely, this is fascinating and counterintuitive, much more likely to move toward doing something about the thing and move toward the thing. It addresses, when they tested this between people, it helps you to address social stress in a way that's probably good for society, and reduces cortisol levels so that you're better at coming up with a plan, figuring out how you're going to allocate resources, and then acting on it. It makes you want to do stuff. That's a lot out of an emotion.
Mm-hmm.
So let's get to the elephant in the room, which is that everybody thinks.
Why do you look at me when you say that's not right?
You have a little bit of angry.
Did that make you angry?
It just made me sad. It was like this. Well, let's deal with the elephant in the room.
Tonality matters in
That's
these things.
leaned in
And
a little
eye
closer.
contact.
Yeah. Raised
There
one
wasn't a
eyebrow.
lot of. You focused very directly on me. Thank you.
Well,
Greg Buckley
everybody's.
is laughing at that.
Buckley did like that.
Also, Katie and Buckley have given us 5-star reviews.
Awesome! Like while we were on.
Yeah, and so I think people should follow their leadership.
That is cool.
Yes.
They are leaders, and they do know.
By
it's
the way,
right.
thank you. Thank you very much. That is just awesome.
Yeah.
And remember, download a couple episodes, enjoy it, listen in your car. Even if the kids are there, it's good for them.
Even if the chubby psychologist is.
So here's what I meant by the elephant in the room.
Oh, I think we know.
By the
I
way,
didn't know it was going to be this kind of show.
Oh,
You should have.
Is this an intervention? Is this even on right now? Because I can't see it on the thing.
oh my gosh, there's a giant bar behind you also, which is out of the shot, and we're going to have
Yeah.
to show that sometime.
Yeah.
Because people think I'm an abuser of that, when in fact I'm ashamed that I don't drink off of that cart. There's
we'll
a
have to
wheeled cart
wheel,
of alcohol.
yeah.
We'll have to wheel it in for our promo for the Bluebird special.
Ooh, that's a good
Yeah.
one. So, Katie, we gotta get you booked for your date to come in on the fashion thing. Alex has some awesome fashion stuff for us, and Somnath and I, who
I have
usually
nothing
wear,
prepared, so
not for today, but I mean for fashion day.
thanks for letting me know.
See, there's no anger there. By the way, one more, before we get to happiness, there was one more way in which anger helped you. I was helping Alex with some voiceover that he had to edit. And at one point, he looked up where he was like sitting with weird, there was a whole strange thing going on. He goes, yeah, you know what you're doing? You're breathing after every sentence like this. And so you have to take this action. And he's like, so that would be, if you do that after every sentence, that would be like 30,000 edits for me. Do you understand what I'm saying? Look at me. Look at me. So I think you caught it before it boiled over.
Yeah, that was mostly frustration. There was no real anger.
But he could have gotten there if I hadn't held my breath then for like
Which,
32
I'm going to
pages.
be honest, when going back and going through
Wasn't
the
it
editing,
really much of an improvement?
Yeah, but you know what?
But you were trying.
Yes.
I mean, you have to respect that I was trying.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that
You need a trophy for
Here's
trying.
the thing. Yeah, I'd like a trophy for 7th place.
By the way, I'm not a family therapist, so I particular thing right here.
No, here's the thing is, maybe it got better, or maybe it didn't, but there was a warning there before you went to anger. That was appropriate and made me feel like I'll give that a whirl.
And
It was feedback.
it's good to use fear as sort of a feedback mechanism. I think on your part to,
to get somebody else to fear.
frustration, and sort of fear on both sides of it. So if you're frustrated with something, you need to, not necessarily hold that in, but display it in a way that's constructive. And I've seen this in Boy Scouts and in other places with
This
clients.
is like vegans and Eagle Scouts again.
Yeah.
A couple minutes can't go by without.
It's
You got, and we're there 2 Eagle Scouts here.
Yeah, I was gonna say you can't really talk.
Yeah.
I think it's true. I mean, there's instances where we're competing against other people in something like building a fire, and you have to boil water the fastest. And to boil water the fastest, you have to build and get your fire started the fastest, and or at least stoke it the most efficiently. So you, as a patrol leader, you get frustrated because you're there with maybe 1 or 2 other people building and starting the fire while the rest of your patrol is going out and in getting the materials to build the fire, the fuel for the fire, and
or the tinder, kindling, and fuel.
So I say fuel because that's mostly what kids bring back, and that's a
It's a big log.
yeah, which, you know, to start a fire, you can't light a match and light a log on fire that's this big, unless you use a lot of gasoline. That's a story for another time. So, I mean, part of that is instructing them and teaching them the process of building and starting a fire. But a lot of it is that they're so caught up in the competitiveness of what you're doing that they're not really paying attention, and so that starts frustrating the patrol leader. And in turn, if you're not using that frustration constructively to the people going out and supposed to getting the materials to build the fire, they're going to just continue bringing back big logs, and then they're going to get angry that you're angry at them. So if you catch that early and use the frustration for a teaching moment.
Ooh, I love how you work that in.
Yeah, and you kind of use it, and it's the same way with clients. If your client is starting to give you pushback about something that they have some kind of preconceived notion about, and you're trying to persuade them into using something or using a tactic or a strategy that you think would work for them or want to test for them, that's a good tool to use that frustration, I think, in a way to push back a little bit and use it as a teaching moment. Probably a little gentler there than with like Boy Scouts,
but it gets at something that's interesting, and I know you eventually want to get to the elephant in the room. But there's a concept called contagion of emotion, which is that people tend to catch emotion like a virus or something, but it's contagious. But with something like anger or fear or anxiety, which are all things that we all know, you know, manifest themselves sort of quickly, but it's also a signal that something might be wrong. But on the positive side, and we'll get to this the next time, the way that leaders cause either negative or positive emotions in other people when they're controlling it well. So whether it's in an individual moment with a client, if it's with your team, if it's in front of a class, the person who has the awareness of this and the ability to manage it is way far ahead of the person who just feels like they are subject to it and that they can't control
And they're
it.
being buffeted around in this sea
Right,
of...
but Alex and Sam had just given great examples, and so did you, of how you use it constructively. And it's not to eliminate it, but it's to make constructive use out of it.
When I raise my voice, which is fairly rare, although Alex one time had an early lesson in how you sometimes need to actually create fear in other people, which involved me saying the following: "Don't make me knock you to the ground."
and that's why you always shovel the driveway.
But Alex then took that and used it at family dinner. Sometimes if he would see the early signs of agitation in me, he would do an impression. He would go, "Don't make me," and he was little at the time, he'd go, "Don't make me knock you to the ground." And then everybody would laugh and it was dissipated.
I think it's also good to sort of teach yourself, if this doesn't come naturally to you, to identify body language and tone of voice for when somebody is getting frustrated and angry. That way, you can sort of constructively use that yourself and de-escalate the situation. But also, it's pretty interesting because you can see how people utilize fear, anger,
Yes.
frustration. Like when I was in high school and the teacher came in and told everybody in the room to quiet down, and they didn't, there was an immediate body language signaling where her hands were by her side, and she immediately made like the stop sign, you know? And that was, and I noticed it, and then immediately after that, she sort of took a breath and got the room to quiet down in obviously the way that she had previously used, because she was pretty good at it, and it was immediate. So she immediately funneled I noticed the frustration, and then she immediately took a breath and funneled that into constructively quieting the room down, rather than just trying to shout over them.
Which would cause that contagion of and back and forth of anger or frustration. So that does bring us to the transition, not to next week's show, because again, just to remind everybody, are you going to get the week off, or are you going to join us by phone, or how should we do that? Because we're going to be in San Diego at Traffic and Diversion. Okay. And when we catch stuff, we're going to just break out and do little things. So if we could find a time when we could get you, we can put you on the phone with us too. Good, cool.
Yeah, we might be able to do a remote.
Oh, we could also do, what was that tool that we used?
There's Be Live, but also Facebook has that built in.
Oh, it does. That's been activated. So we'll
Okay.
we'll
Yeah.
find a time. So there's going to probably be over the next week 2 or 3 or 4 mini shows rather than an hour-long show next week. And then the following week we're going to get to the other piece of this. I think you're joining us.
That's right.
Which is happiness has an important role in this. If we get too far to the end of happiness, we're on the beach, we're super relaxed, we don't want to leave the yoga class, people are poking us to wake us up, nothing happens. Yet without the ability to find a quiet, happy place, and without the ability to cultivate this disassociation that we're talking about, like when you really want to experience happiness and get all the benefits of that, which is super relaxing for most people and floods your mind and body with totally different neurochemicals that are not associated with doing, but that are associated with a state that's excellent to prepare you to do. Understanding how to kind of transition from one to the other and how to keep control. And the secret to control is recognizing when anger is coming on earlier. So to go back to your very early point, you're blowing out the match rather than trying to put out a house fire. Mm-hmm. And there are some tricks to that, and we're all pretty good at that in our own ways. And I was starting to say, when I use what looks like anger to most people, I'm in a super calm state. But it was frustration, anxiety to frustration to anger that got me there, where now I say, okay, I've tried this a couple of other ways. Mm-hmm. You've left me no choice but to give you what appears like it might turn into violence or fear or whatever, because I got to break your cycle and get your attention.
It's reminding me of escalation of force in law enforcement. You don't start with the most lethal thing that you have.
Right.
There is a method to how it is applied, and I think you gave a great example of that. I think a lot of people are conditioned to feel and then react, but there's something in between the stimulus and the response, which is your ability to think and decide, to choose what to do next.
And meditating and finding happiness and a kind of balance point is a really useful tool in expanding the apparent gap between stimulus and response and being more able to use it.
Right.
But understand, it is actually the fear and anger that's helping you to be able to do it. And so don't deny it. So we're about to wrap up on Psalms, we can't call you Kwanjik Nim yet.
No, not yet.
No, and Kwanjik Nim, hopefully he's not watching because he might think that we're waiting for like something to happen, which is not really what I'm saying. But we have a couple books here. A few of them are going to seem bizarre in light of what we just said, which will come as no surprise. This one's not for everybody, but it's called Midget Ninja and Tactical Laxatives, which has a frowned upon word in the title, Bizarre Warfare Through the Ages. So rage takes us to doing very bizarre things to one another, and anger. But here again, you're going to see where anger was often a motivator to do very strange but highly effective things. You gave me this book, Learned Optimism, when I was describing something to you that I think you diagnosed as like floating anxiety, or I forget exactly what you called it, but it sounded terrible. And this is how to change your mind in your life. And this is anxiety and frustration just lead to stress and raise levels of cortisol and a narrower view, and it's none of the stuff that we want. So this is going to how you interrupt that and find that place where you're happier more easily and more quickly. And then finally, 10% Happier by Dan Harris. This is a super quick read. I did not think I would like this book. I ended up loving it. It's called How I Tamed the Voice in My Head, Reduced Stress Without Losing My Edge, and Found Self-Help That Actually Works. A true story. Notice, Harris is not recommending walking around in a blissful state because you wouldn't get anything done.
Right.
What he is recommending is trying to find a little bit more happiness, a little bit more often, and how profoundly that could change your life for the better. And that is a message today, which is that it doesn't take too much happiness to help us to deal with anger and frustration and anxiety, which happen to us all the time because we're biologically programmed to be able to use them all the time. So hopefully this was a great episode for you guys. If you missed parts of it, absolutely awesome audience today, by the way. Thank you. Jump on the podcast, subscribe to the podcast, give us a 5-star review, leave comments, and absolutely share this. We look forward to seeing you probably a couple of times toward the end of this week and next weekend. And then the following weekend, we might even have Dr. Dave back for, so today was anger, fear, anxiety, and frustration, the true drivers of success. Part 2 is happiness, the true driver of success. What's up with fear, anxiety, and frustration?
Sounds great.
So we're going to revisit this again. It's worth it. Thank you, everybody. Have an awesome weekend.